Hi, everyone. My name is Joe Kelly. I am the Community Relations Program host with the Rochester Hills Public Library. Welcome to this evening's program at Author Talk Climate Courage with Andreas Karleas?
Karleas.
Karleas, thank you. Oh my God, we just went over it.
It's okay.
Again, to our program tonight, Author Talk Climate Courage with Andreas Karleas. Join us on Thursday, April 22nd at 7 p.m. for our next program, which is called Cut the Cord with cord cutters Chuck Eglinton and Chris Edward, who will define streaming, discuss options for free and paid streaming, show how it saves money, and explain how to get 100% free digital TV. To register for that program, please visit calendar.rhpl.org. We will leave a little bit of time after our presentation and passages today with tonight's program. You can feel free to leave any questions throughout the chat as our audience will remain muted, and I will go ahead and give them to our presenter and moderate them and pass them along to him. So please feel free to leave those questions throughout the chat. I'll be keeping track of them. And, of course, as we get closer to the questions, think of a couple of questions you'd like answered. The program tonight will be recorded, and it'll be available about 1 week from tonight. So that will be on the 20th on our YouTube channel and on rhpl.org. Finally, I'd like to thank the Friends of the Rochester Hills Public Library for always helping to financially support our programs. So first, I would like to welcome you all, our presenter, Andreas Karleas. Andreas, please take it away.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you for having me. And thank you all for taking the time to tune in. And for those of you that will watch this in the future, thanks for listening and for your interest in this subject. So my name is Andreas Karleas. I'm the author of Climate Courage, How Tackling Climate Change Can Build Community, Transform the Economy, and Bridge the Political Divide in America. And the book came out in September 2020. And in addition to writing the book, I'm also the founder and executive director of a nonprofit organization based in San Francisco called Revolve. And what Revolve does is we finance solar energy projects for nonprofits around the country. So if there are homeless shelters or schools, churches, health clinics, any nonprofit organization, food banks that is interested in going solar, a lot of times they have a difficult time getting the financing to do so. And so when that happens, we are basically helping them to overcome that challenge, and we provide financing for them so that they can go solar and they can save money on their electricity bills, and then they can provide more of their service to the community. So that was, I've been working at Revolve for 10 years. I started it in 2011, and I've been working at it for a really long time and really trying to ask ourselves the question, when it comes to climate change, how do we get people involved? How do we give people a sense that we can do something and that this problem is solvable? Because to me, that seems to be the biggest problem, is that people think that the problem is too overwhelming and scary and don't know how to get involved and don't know how to take action. So where is it that Revolve and Climate Courage kind of fit into this? Well, as I was sort of doing this work for many years, talking to a lot of people, I heard a lot of really exciting stories from different parts of the country, people from different walks of life, Republicans, Democrats, religious, non-religious, scientists, politicians, business people, etc., about all of these exciting developments that were happening around climate change in terms of solutions, in terms of how are we getting this show on the road? How are we creating momentum for a better future? And what I discovered was that I was hearing a lot of these stories and these anecdotes, but that not a lot of other people were hearing them, and they weren't in the news. And I would talk about how clean energy was growing so quickly, and there were all these exciting developments happening, and most people had never heard of that. So I figured, well, let me write all these stories down in a book and share that. And that's really what Climate Courage is it's all of the hopeful stories that I've heard over the last 10 years that give me hope that we can solve this, and that when we work together at the community level, that we can know that what we're doing is really having an impact. So I will start out with a short passage that I think kind of sets up the kind of introduction a little bit of the book. So if you don't mind, we'll do a little reading time. Ultimately, climate change will not be solved by climate scientists and engineers calculating how many solar panels we need installed. It will be solved by citizens sitting down and talking to each other over a glass of iced tea about how we need to start taking care of each other, trusting each other, and working together to save this place and everything we love. It's only when we realize that we're all in this together that we can start to make progress towards fixing the problem. Rowing harder won't make much of a difference if half the folks in the boat are rowing in the opposite direction. In order to all row in the same direction, we must rebuild trust and camaraderie across the political divide. We must try and understand each other's point of view and honor each other's humanity. We have to swallow our pride and practice forgiveness and learn to let go of past hurts. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, love is the only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend. By its very nature, hate destroys and tears down. By its very nature, love creates and builds up. Love transforms with redemptive power. Protecting our planet in a way that's good for the economy and good for us as individuals and communities is something all Americans can support. A clean energy powered, sustainable economy designed to lift people out of poverty and create a more equitable culture will not only protect the planet from disastrous climate change, but it will create jobs, strengthen our national security, make us more resilient, strengthen our community bonds, and even make us healthier and happier in the process. Solving climate change can be the greatest bipartisan effort this country has ever seen. The question of our time is whether we have the foresight to put aside our differences for a short while, reach across the aisle to assess the problem collectively, analyze our options, determine how we want to solve it, and make great strides towards doing so before it is too late. While it may seem like a stretch, the truth is that the fate of the human race depends to a large degree on whether Americans can work out their issues. Can we heal the wounds between our parties, find common ground in our political philosophies, reconcile our cultural values, and remember our civility in the process? Can we relearn our ability to debate based on facts and evidence and not political spin and media talking points? Can we value the ability to compromise, to engage in bipartisan solutions, to recognize the humanity in those who see the world, excuse me, to engage in bipartisan solutions, to recognize the humanity in those who see the world differently from us? This book highlights the bright spots in the climate fight, the stories of people finding common ground, the examples of people from all walks of life, of various political stripes, coming together around common sense solutions that we all can get behind. My hope is that these stories point us in the right direction and give us insights into how to build on that momentum. So that's a little brief passage from the introduction of the book. And really, I think it sums up the main message, which to me is this. We have been living in a world where for the past 30 years, we have been told from many sources that climate change is a partisan issue, right? Democrats, starting with Al Gore, wanted to come up with solutions, and Republicans, don't believe it, or they think it's going to cost jobs, and we basically have come to a stalemate. And the rest of the world is waiting for the United States to get on with it. The last part is true. The rest of the world is waiting for the US to get on with it. But the first part is not true. It's not true that Americans are divided on climate change. It's not true that this is a Republican or Democrat issue. This is not a liberal or conservative issue, as much as the media would like us to think, and as much as politicians would like us to think. The truth is that when you ask average Americans, American citizens, 67%, so over 2/3 of Americans, understand that climate change is real and that it's caused by humans. 85% of Americans are in favor of 100% clean energy, right? 85% of Americans would like to see this country powered with 100% clean energy. How many issues do 85% of Americans agree on in today's day and age, right? Really, really, there's really not a lot. We are living in one of the most divided political moments in our country's history. Certainly, within the last 60 years. And it seems like every issue falls on one side or the other of the political divide. And while we hear that climate change also falls into that divide, like I said, it's not true. 85% of Americans want 100% renewable energy. So that should give us all a lot of hope. Businesses are also on board with renewable energy. Of the top most highly valued 6 companies in the world, 5 of them are already 100% renewable energy powered. And that's a growing trend. We're seeing more and more people around the country, more and more businesses, I should say, going solar, going renewable, because it's good for their bottom line, as well as it's good for the environment, and they want to do right by the planet. Really, it's only what we see in the news that tells us that there's this big divide. Now, why do they make it seem so divisive? Well, the fossil fuel industry has pumped a lot of money into messages that make it seem that there's a lot of division, and the media likes to keep us tuned in. So nothing like keeping us sort of on the edge of our seats and tuning in than by making a drama out of it. But like I said, average Americans are all on the same page that climate change is real. We can see that it's happening in our communities, and we want to make sure that we are moving towards a 100% clean energy powered world as quickly as we can. Now, there are a couple stories I want to tell that sort of help outline this. And actually, a number of them in the book take place right in Michigan. So one of them is in an area I'm sure many of you are familiar with called Highland Park within Detroit. Highland Park, a few years ago, had a very big debt crisis. And it was so bad that Detroit Edison went in and repoed all the street lights on the streets. So the citizens of Highland Park were actually left without any power, without any streetlights at night. And it was dark. It was dark and it was dangerous, and crime was on the rise. And it was a really problematic situation for the community. And a friend of mine, a guy named Jackson Capel, worked with his community members, and they started an organization called Solidarity. And what they did is they started crowdfunding for the costs to put up solar-powered streetlights in Highland Park. And they now have multiple streetlights that are powered just by the sun, that have their own battery packs, and you can walk around at night safely through the solar-powered streetlights. This is the type of solution that I like to highlight, because it's not just about solving the climate crisis. It is also improving the quality of life for people in that community. It's giving them access to light and to safety, and it's a necessity in the community. These are the types of solutions that we also want to highlight, because in every community, there's going to be a different solution that's required. There's going to be a different type of technology or strategy that we're going to use in order to make climate solutions real and beneficial to our community. If we pop over to Detroit, I think what many of us know is that we are moving very quickly towards a world where electric vehicles will be the majority of the vehicles that we're driving. I'm sure many of you know, and I write about this in the book, that GM announced that this year it will be releasing an all-electric Hummer, right? It goes 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. It's an extremely powerful, fast, luxurious, all-electric Hummer made in Detroit. This is, and then of course, this was after the book came out, but most recently in both the Super Bowl as well as the World Series, GM did a series of advertisements on TV with LeBron James as being the spokesperson for the all-electric Hummer, right? Tesla, which is, one of the most innovative car companies in the world, that has built 2 gigafactories, one in Las Vegas, one in Nevada and one in Buffalo, New York, are bringing auto manufacturing jobs back to the United States, when what we've seen for so many decades is the trend in the opposite direction. GM, as well as the battery manufacturers working to make those electric cars, are in Michigan, and they are in Lordstown, Ohio, and places where we had been seeing manufacturing jobs leaving, and now they're coming back because of electric vehicle manufacturing. So those are a couple of the bright spots that I think are really exciting. And if you still think it's a partisan divide or a partisan issue, another example is in Georgetown, Texas, which is now the second city in America to be 100% renewable energy powered after Burlington, Vermont. Now, Burlington, Vermont is a liberal sort of enclave, and you're not surprised that they went 100% renewable energy. But Georgetown, Texas is quite the opposite. It's a conservative area in Texas. The mayor, Dale Ross of Georgetown, is a conservative Republican. And he was presented with 2 different options of how to power the city. One was with long-term natural gas contracts, and the other was with long-term solar and wind. And not only was the solar and wind cheaper, but it was longer term. And he's now able to attract businesses who want to say that they're 100% clean energy powered to Georgetown. It's also lowering local air pollution. It's also using less water in Georgetown. So there are all these benefits that come from renewable energy, and he was able to see that. And he basically has said, look, this is not a Republican or Democrat issue. This is a fiscally conservative, educated decision that I've made to power my city with 100% renewable energy. Mark Jacobson, who's a Stanford professor of civil engineering, him and his team have done a tremendous amount of research, and they've found out that when we reach 100% renewable energy in this country, that we will be able to create $1 trillion a year worth of savings for Americans on their electricity bills, number one. And number two, we're going to create a net increase of 2 million jobs. 2 million jobs are going to be created by switching to clean energy. So that's the opportunity that's in front of us, and I think that what we often hear, the big dilemma that we often hear is that it's a choice between the economy or the environment. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. Like I said, by switching to clean energy and building local climate solutions in our communities, it will save us money, it will improve our health, it will create new jobs, and it'll put us as a leader in the global economy, not to mention make us more resilient in the face of climate change. So those are the types of messages that I believe we need to be telling more of. Now, another really important point that I want to mention, Catherine Hayhoe is a climate scientist at the Texas Tech University. She's a leading global climate scientist who's also a woman of faith. She's married to an evangelical pastor in Lubbock, Texas. And she herself and her husband are often preaching to evangelical communities about climate change and how that relates to their faith. One of the things that she points out is that in America, we have adopted this sort of unspoken rule that we're not supposed to talk about climate change. In fact, most people don't ever talk about it, almost like money or religion or politics. We don't want to bring it up because it's a taboo subject. If I bring up climate change, I might rub somebody the wrong way. Well, that is one of the biggest areas that we can focus on to take action. Because if we all are here, as I mentioned, 2/3 of Americans agree climate change is real and we want to solve it. 85% know that we want to see 100% renewable energy. But if we're all keeping that information to ourselves, we're not sharing it with each other, then we don't really get the conversation started. And that's why the media and the politics are all able to present this, oh, it's so partisan. It's not. But we need to do our part to talk about it. We need to talk about it with our families, with our neighbors, with our coworkers, with everyone that we can. We need to talk about how we feel about climate change. What are the solutions here at the local level? What are here the solutions at the community level that we can get involved with? Because when we think about climate change, we all get really anxious and we all get overwhelmed. And oftentimes what people think is, I can either reduce my own environmental footprint or I can hope that the federal government solves it. And while we are seeing some very promising activity with the Biden administration through this infrastructure bill that's going to be focused on climate solutions, which is really exciting, the biggest area that we have that we can focus on is at the community level. How can we in Rochester, Michigan, come together and create local solutions the same way that Highland Park did? How can we come together to think, what can we do to help drive clean energy growth, or electric vehicle adoption, or gardening more, or bicycle lanes, or whatever it is that we can at the community level to really help move this needle, because that's where we can have, the biggest impact. So I'll read a little passage about that. In order to get energized about solving climate change, the public needs to feel empowered to make a difference. In between individual action and advocating for legislation at the federal level, there are efforts we can take at the community level. At the community level, our collective actions can produce tangible results as well as practical benefits, giving us the greatest sense of efficacy and empowerment. These local actions have the best chance to change the conversation around climate change in America. And yet, we don't necessarily need all climate skeptics' beliefs to change. If efforts to combat climate change locally, for example, putting up solar panels on the local school, are creating tangible benefits for the community, such as saving money and creating jobs, then people will get involved and support the effort regardless of their belief in climate change. And that has the potential to spread community to community, county to county, and state to state. So that to me is really, one of the most important takeaways from the book, is that at the community level, we're much more powerful than we realize. There's another story that I talk about in the book where there's a nonprofit organization called Solar United Neighbors, and they work in many parts of the country, and they help people in their community go solar. And the way that got started was, there was the founder of the organization. Her name is Anya Schoolman, and she lived in a town called Mount Pleasant, which is in Washington, D.C. And her son, who was 12 years old at the time, came home one day, and him and his friend who had been at school saw the movie Inconvenient Truth. And they came home and they told their mom, look, we need to do something about climate change. And she said, well, what should we do? And they started to come up with some ideas, and they decided that they should knock on doors of all their neighbors and ask if they could go solar as a neighborhood, if all of the homeowners in that community would go solar at the same time and thus get a discount on their solar installations. And that's what they did. And to me, what's exciting about this is that all it takes is a little bit of courage. All it takes is a little bit of initiative, a little bit of effort from somebody who says, okay, I know that this is a problem. I want to take action. What can I do? Let me get together with my neighbors. Let me start brainstorming, take some small action, and see what happens. And here's how that played out. The recurring theme in all these stories is that climate change is a winnable battle, because so many of the solutions are simple, can be organized at the community level, and are easily replicable. Plus, we've got popular sentiment and economics on our side. All we need to do is give people an easy way to get involved, and the word will spread. What started as two 12-year-old boys mustering enough climate courage to knock on doors in their neighborhood, to talk to people about solar, resulted in 27 megawatts of solar deployed, laws changed in 10 states, and nearly 1,000 new solar jobs created. All because two 12-year-old boys saw a film, were inspired, and had the guts to do something about it. Starting to feel courageous yet? The organizations I've discussed so far in this chapter are building real clean energy projects that benefit people at the community level, that can garner public support, which is what's ultimately needed to make industries change direction and policymakers shift priorities. So that's really, I think, the main focus that we can have is that we are able to do something. We are not passive viewers in this problem. Those of us on the call today, the 6 of us that are here right now, we're doing something right now by talking about it. And hopefully what we take away from this conversation, whether it's a story to share or an idea to explore, the biggest thing that we can take away is we can solve the climate crisis here in our community. What can we do? What can we do to go to our neighbors, our families, our coworkers, and see what's possible to make our community more sustainable? And the more you do that, the more we'll build momentum. Here's another passage that I'll end on, and then happy to open it up to questions that folks might have. Throughout this book, we've explored several ways of thinking about climate change and talking about climate change, and we've learned about the positive momentum that we're building towards solutions. At the end of the day, though, we still have a heavy lift ahead of us. I want then to conclude this book with some thoughts on how we can all contribute to the transition to clean energy and sustainability in our local communities where we have the most agency. Climate change will not be solved by a silver bullet. Solar energy alone, for example, will not solve climate change. Creating an economy that's equitable and sustainable will require lots of technological adjustments, small and large, as well as new inventions, customs, laws, policies, and social norms. Furthermore, solutions must be localized, specialized, and appropriate for the culture in which they are meant to work. That means that we need everyone to contribute their expertise. No one single person, group of people, or country can solve the problem, but together we can. No matter your field of work, no matter where you live or what role you play in your home, your workplace, or community, you and the people around you are interacting with nature and society and have insights into how to solve the problems associated with climate change. So that's where we start. Climate change solutions are not waiting for us at a fancy delegation of diplomats in a foreign country. They are at our kitchen table. And remember, whatever you do, be it big or small, make sure it involves other people. Building community through climate solutions is the key to making them work. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Andreas. That was fantastic. Lots of really inspiring passages there. And we already have at least one question in the chat. I will give everybody else a moment to think up a couple of questions. I'm just going to lead off with one that came up off the top of my head, if you're ready to go ahead with questions.
Please, absolutely.
Awesome. So you mentioned earlier about those 2 boys seeing the inconvenient truth and all the awesome change that came from that. And that leads me to ask, like, what role do you think education on issues like climate change plays in that activism? And how do you think we as a community can encourage that activism in the younger members of the community?
Oh, wow. That is such a great question. I think that education is everything. Education is everything. When we hear about climate change, we might hear false, theories that are not true. So education counters that. We might hear that the solutions aren't available, but education counters that. We might hear that it's going to cost too much, but education counters that. So the more that we can get educated on the problem, the more we realize how solvable it really is. And the more we realize how far the solutions have come. And that, here's a point. When I started Revolve 10 years ago, the cost of solar panels were 90% more expensive than they are today. The cost of solar panels have dropped 90% in just the last 10 years, right? And it's only going to continue to drop because, as we know, technology gets cheaper and cheaper. So that is what education can do is let us know these are the types of things. And that's why I wrote the book, because I've got to see these things firsthand, and not a lot of people hear these stories. They're not commonly told. So we really do need to educate it. Educate ourselves and the public as much as possible. So films, school, television programs, books, library books, and programs like this are all exactly what we need to be doing. Like I said, Katharine Hayhoe is right when she says the most important thing we can do about climate change is talk more about it. We talk more about it, and we educate each other, and we share our thoughts and ideas, and it's really, really important. And in terms of the youth in particular, I'm sure many of you, like I, have been very inspired by Greta Thunberg, who is a Swedish activist who, a teenager, started striking from school for climate change to call attention to it. And now she has been, speaking at delegations around the world and has really given a voice to her generation, which is to say, we are still in school. We are not adults, and we can see how bad this crisis is. And you, the adults, need to take this seriously. You need to start acting like this is a crisis, because it is. And you need to start listening to the scientists who tell us what it is that we need to do in order to solve it, so that my generation can have a chance at a livable planet. And that's, I think, something that we all need to really think about. I mean, those of us, I don't know the ages of the folks on the call, but if you're an adult, you are alive during a very important time in human history. What we do over the next 10 years, really, and beyond, but really this decade, what we do this decade will reverberate in eternity. Like, what we do this decade will have a ripple effect for all of species for all time. And so that's a very, very important notion for us to fully understand and realize, am I doing everything I can? Am I bringing this up at work? Am I bringing this up in my community, at my kids' school, with my family? Because we are going to have to realize that that Greta's generation and beyond will be looking back and reading about our generation in history and saying, did they do everything they could as quickly as possible?
Absolutely. That's a lot of great guidance on what mindsets we should be developing and encouraging. We have a question in from Gregory on the call, and he notes that wind and solar electricity is available to everyone in Michigan for 2 to 3 cents per kilowatt additional. But he notes that it seems that few people are willing to sign up for this. And why do you think so few people are willing to sign up for alternative sources like wind and solar energy, despite their seemingly more ready access?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gregory. I think it's a complicated question. I think one is that first of all, when a utility offers that option for people, what's typically called a green pricing program, where people can pay extra. Oh, you can, here for a premium, you can, buy wind and solar and, be 100% green. They're really targeting a certain audience. They're targeting, people who care about the issue, who have a little bit disposable income and are willing to say, I'm willing to pay extra, for this. But frankly, they shouldn't be doing it that way, right? We know that the cost of clean energy is much cheaper, than any other form. In fact, recently, I forget where it was, but somewhere very recently, there was so much wind energy being produced that the utilities started charging negative prices for it, meaning they were paying people to use electricity during that period of time because they had to use the wind energy. So, and as I mentioned, we know, for example, one of the stories I talk about in the book is MGM, the big casino and hotel chain in Las Vegas. They own over a dozen of the hotels on the Strip. They wanted to go solar, and they wanted to build a big solar farm in the desert to power all of their needs. And the utility said, well, we don't really like that because you're our biggest customer. And so we're going to charge you $80 million in order to generate your own power instead of buying from us. And it's not a small amount of money. $80 million is a lot of money. And MGM did the math, and they figured out that it was still going to be cheaper for them to build their own solar farm and produce their own solar power and pay an $80 million fine than it was to stay with the local utility. So all that goes to show you that the costs of renewable energy are much cheaper than traditional fossil fuel electricity generation. So now, not every utility is there yet, and of course, different parts of the country have various amounts of renewable energy online. But the goal, Gregory, the goal is that we get to a point where everybody has access to sign up for clean energy, and that it becomes the default because it is cheaper, and that the utility recognizes that. For example, Xcel Energy, which is one of the biggest utilities, and serves multiple states, Colorado, New Mexico, et cetera. They have already committed to becoming a 100% clean energy utility. That they have looked at the business model themselves as the utility and said, and again, it's not just because they care about the climate. They've often been criticized for all their fossil fuel production over the years, but they have looked at the math and said, this is where the economy is going. This is where the costs are going to continue to drop. So we're doubling down on going 100% renewable. So Gregory, I feel your pain, and I know it is tough for most folks to find the extra money to pay an extra couple of bucks a month for green power. I totally get that. Hopefully it won't be that way for long, and hopefully our community efforts, pressuring our utilities, pressuring our local elected officials to change those rules so that clean energy is cheaper will be the wave of the future.
Excellent. And Gregory also has to follow up here regarding solar installations. And I think this kind of also ties back to, at least to me, when you were making the comment about how people ended up paying less for all this surplus of like wind energy. And this kind of falls under, I think, a lot of the questions people have about alternative sources. We're kind of coming to understand them. Is yes, when solar installations are used, is there like energy storage to span periods when solar is not really generating the electricity?
Oh yeah, this is fantastic, and actually, it's because of what we're seeing with the electric vehicle revolution that's happening in places like Detroit and Lordstown, Ohio, where we're building new factories to manufacture batteries and storage, that the costs of storage are going to continue to drop so that we can bundle solar plus storage or wind plus local storage plus local microgrids so that we have a resilient clean energy powered community. That's the goal. For example, in Puerto Rico, I talk about this in the book, after Hurricane Maria, as we all saw in the news, residents of Puerto Rico were left without power for 6 to 12 months, right? Their electric grid was completely decimated. They had to rebuild it from scratch. And what they've decided to do is build a series of microgrids across the island, which will be 100% clean energy powered and will have battery storage so that each microgrid is going to be a resilient pocket that's not affected by what happens on the other side of the island. And that's really the goal, Gregory, that we all should be thinking about. And, in the United States, the electrical grid, first of all, the technology that we use was the same technology that Thomas Edison was using, right? It's over a century old. And in fact, in many parts of the country, it's actually those original, century old wires that are still up. So the grid, the electrical grid in the United States is actually well overdue for an overhaul. And so the goal is really, rather than replacing it with the traditional types of technologies that we had used a century ago, of having a big power plant, and a big polluting power plant with very long high transmission, high voltage transmission lines to bring power to people, which, by the way, you're losing 40% of your power just along the transmission lines. We can come up with a brand new way of powering our communities, which is with local solar, wind, renewable energy plus storage on resilient micro mini grids that can really create more resiliency as well as more wealth and more jobs in our local community.
Yeah, that's a lot of great enticing benefits to that. And additionally on that, my girlfriend actually overheard the conversation. I was wondering as well. She was asking, do you think events like what happened in Puerto Rico and actually what happened recently in Texas with their massive power outage, do you think things like this might make changes, including these storage options and these resilient little kind of pocket grids, might make Americans more receptive to these potential changes in alternative energy?
Oh yeah, 100. Fantastic question, and we're already seeing it. I mean, for those terrible days in Texas recently, where who would have ever thought that Texas would freeze over, and that so many people would be faced with these horrible blackouts. I mean, they were freezing in their homes in Texas. Nobody would have ever thought of it. And this is what we can expect with climate change. Here in California, where I live, the wildfires get worse every single year. And the power outages because of that get worse every year. Rolling blackouts that affect, thousands and thousands of people. So we are already seeing, Revolve, the organization that I run, almost every nonprofit that wants to go solar now is also asking for storage, because they want to be a resilient center in their community. If it's the local church or the local school, they want to make sure that if there's a power outage, that people from the neighborhood can come and congregate there and charge their phones and get a cup of coffee and use the radio and things like that. So this is the moment that we're in, where we know that extreme weather events are going to continue. We're going to continue to see wildfires and hurricanes and storms and floods and the like. We know that our aging infrastructure needs to be replaced, and the cost of clean energy and storage and microgrids is coming down very quickly. So now is the time to build that more resilient grid. And I do think Americans not only are more open to it, but are actively demanding it, right now.
Fantastic. I also had another question, and it's kind of like two when I originally wrote it, but I think you can kind of consolidate into one. But I know that a lot of the hurdles for people in terms of coming on to these alternative sources is either something like along the lines of a lack of infrastructure or lack of accessibility to these sources. And additionally, outside of circumstances like the individual person in their home being able to opt into another plan where you can use alternative sources, there are a lot of people who live in places like apartment buildings who don't really have the leeway to choose what power sources they're using, or whether or not, say, they have access to recycling in terms of disposal. So what steps can we do in our community to advocate for access to either an alternative energy source, or if we're even in like a smaller shared community, what are some steps we can take to try and provide ourselves with tools that we can use as a community to kind of combat these climate problems?
Yeah, great question. So, the first thing I'd mention is, the organization I run, Revolve, has a program that we call our Solar Ambassador Fellowship. And basically, anybody, any age, can go to our website, revolve.org, re-volv.org, and you can click on the Solar Ambassador page. And what you can do there is go through an online training. We call it the Solar Ambassador Boot Camp, and it takes about an hour. And it basically will give you and then we will follow up with resources. And basically, we will train you on how to go into your community and find local nonprofits that could benefit from solar. So it could be that maybe, in Rochester, there's a school or a homeless shelter or a church or a food bank or a health clinic or an arts center or a dance center or a YMCA, any Boys and Girls Club, any nonprofit organization that serves the community would be a great place to help them go solar. Not only will we help them go solar so that they go solar for free, they don't have to put any money up front, and they can start saving money on their electricity bills right away, which they can then put back into the community, right? Like, let's say if it's a food bank, they can provide more food to the hungry. If it's a homeless shelter, they can provide more beds for the homeless. But in addition to that, just by the nonprofit going solar and the community engagement work that the solar ambassadors do, will actually raise awareness about solar, and will show, hey, look, Rochester's going solar, and that's going to make the next town over want to do it, and that's going to make the next town over want to do it. So that's the first thing I would say is start a solar project for a local nonprofit in your community through revolve.org. Another great way to get involved is through a partner of ours called the Sierra Club. Well, I'm sure many of you know the Sierra Club. They're one of the biggest environmental groups in the world. They have a campaign called Ready for 100. And what they do is they get together with volunteers in their community, and they try to convince their local elected officials at the city, county, or town or state level to commit to 100% renewable energy. So maybe you bring this to the Rochester leadership and say, hey, we want Rochester to be 100% clean powered, and Ready for 100 will provide you with all the resources and training you need in order to make that happen. I mentioned earlier Solar United Neighbors. They're another partner of ours. What they do is, as I mentioned, they can help a whole bunch of homeowners go solar at the same time. So you can, get your neighbor. Let's say you got, 15 houses on your block. You can say, well, why don't we all go solar at the same time, and then we'll get a big discount by doing so. And Solar United Neighbors can help you do that. The other thing I would say is just, again, having events like this, talking about it, getting people involved. Getting the conversation started one way or another is going to be a great opportunity for you.
Fantastic. And if anybody else has another question, feel free to go ahead and ask it now. Otherwise, I don't see any more on our list currently. So please take a moment and ask a question if you have one. Otherwise, I think we can go ahead and say we've had a really productive and wonderful presentation here. And I think this is really inspiring. Definitely made me want to start looking into some of these resources. So I think we can start wrapping it up and call it an evening. Thank you very much, Andreas. This is a really awesome program, really inspiring. Thank you so much for taking the time to give this presentation. And thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. Really hope this inspires you to, have these conversations with the people around you, and we can all make a little more good happen in the world.
That's right. That's right. Yes. No, thank you, Joseph, for having me. And thank you all for tuning in. It was a pleasure and an honor to be here.
Thank you very much. All right. We will hope to see you all at our next presentation on the 22nd. And again, this will be going up next week. And you can feel free to share it with any of your friends and family members curious about climate change or some of these topics. And, we can keep that information going. So thank you all very much for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and say good night.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Look forward to being in touch. Bye-bye.